Okay. Uh, Hope everybody had a good break. We're going to be talking about schedules tonight. And can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I can.
Thank you. All right. We're going to be talking about both. We're going to be talking about predictive, we're going to be talking about hybrid, and we're going to be talking about adaptive schedules. So a schedule management plan is one that definitely will be part of your predictive uh, package. Okay, so just basic stuff. Schedule management plans going to describe how activities are going to be defined and um, progressively elaborated. What we mean is by that is that we're going to be breaking down the work breakdown structure into work packages and then into tasks. Okay. And in that schedule management plan, you're going to identify what you're going to be using to create and maintain the schedule and what methods you're going to be using. You'll also document the schedule format. When we're talking about format, it's there are several different things that you can do. You can use a Gantt chart. You can use a milestone chart. You can also use an Excel spreadsheet. And the schedule management plan establishes criteria for developing and controlling the schedule. So you're going to document how the schedule is controlled. In other words, how do you maintain uh, the project on schedule? Okay. And you can tailor the schedule management plan depending on what type of project you have. If it's similar to a previous project, you can borrow from that. And especially in the construction industry, if you're building just a new section of road or putting up a building that's similar height and structure to one that you've done before, you know, you have an idea of what the schedule would be. And you're going to want to document the um, process that you need to follow to update the status of the schedule and record the project progress in the schedule module during execution. Um, when you've got a hybrid project or a hybrid approach, the schedule management plan is not really part of the adaptive portion. And at the same time, if you're doing a hybrid project, schedule management plan establishes some guardrails that that the project can follow. Okay. So here's the definition. The component of the project or program management plan. So
Are
know
you
that.
sharing something? Are you speaking from something that you would share?
I thought that I was sharing.
I don't see anything.
Does anybody see anything?
So I have a question. Are we supposed to be watching a video or are you teaching tonight too? I think we
I'm
have a
teaching
lower.
tonight.
Okay, because I think we
So
got an email from Barry and I feel like there's not a lot of people on tonight because I think we're all confused. Yeah.
Yeah, we got it
That's it.
in the session and in an email that said it would be canceled tonight and we were gonna get a video.
Oh, crud. Yeah, he didn't get a hold of me in time, I guess.
But you
So,
are sharing.
you're sharing, and we see slide 46 right now, where it says get from A to B overview of schedule planning process.
But it stuck. We couldn't see
46?
we couldn't see the definition around 46.
Okay, I'm showing slide 47.
You might need to stop and start sharing.
It's like, I don't see any
Yeah.
I don't see
slides.
any slides at all. I can't
Yeah.
see
Okay,
anything.
we're gonna stop sharing. We're gonna stop
But I guess if you're
doing
gonna
everything.
teach, then maybe those that are us that are here keep going, and those that aren't watch the recording. Is that the protocol, Harry?
That's the thing.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Thank
Okay,
you.
let's try sharing again. Give me 1 second here. All right. This is very strange. Okay, what we're gonna have to do is this. I won't be in slide mode. It's going to be just regular. Okay. All right. Start over here. We're talking about schedule tonight. Yeah, okay. All right. Give an overview of both the predictive and the adaptive schedule planning process. For predictive, project manager makes sure that the work package is broken down into the required activities so that you've got a detailed work breakdown structure of everything that's going to have to be done to fulfill the schedule. Any of the dependencies and precedence relationships are determined. Activity durations are estimated based on the average resources. So you're going to give an estimate of how long each of the activities is going to take. You're going to need to determine the critical path and resolve any resource over allocations. And we're going to be talking about this in detail in subsequent slides. And then what you're going to be doing is, if need be, compress the schedule to meet any of the constraints that are imposed upon this particular project. Okay. Or adaptive projects, you need to decide whether you're going to use a time boxed method or you're going to be using a continuous flow method, otherwise known as a Kanban. Okay. You'll establish approximately when releases need to occur and document the time frames for each one of them. Each iteration will be planned as it occurs. You'll have a product backlog and then pull from that and create your iteration backlog. And for each of the iterations, you'll work those particular features, breaking them down into stories and working on the stories. The development team and the test with the testers need to sign up, commit to providing that particular functionality for each iteration. The project team is going to prioritize and estimate and decompose the user stories into tasks and determine the iteration velocity. Well, velocity, except for the initial iteration, should be established based on the number of story points or whatever unit you're using to do your estimates worth of work. And ideally for a well-functioning team, that'll be pretty consistent because the estimation, it's going to be dependent on the estimation skills and the delivery skills of the team. Now, the project team is going to work with the product owner, and the product owner really is part of the project team to refine the backlog after each iteration and plan the next. So once you've gone through, say ideally a 2-week iteration, you need to plan for the next iteration. Okay. And each time you enter a new iteration, go back and refine the backlog. So you'll take the feedback from the iteration that was just completed and use that to help prioritize the backlog for the iteration coming up. And this is what I was talking about before, schedule management plan. And let me pull that over there, don't need that. So schedule management plan is a component of the project or program management plan. And so know that for the exam, that unlike some of the things that we've talked about in previous classes, schedule management plan is definitely a component of the project plan. Or if it's a larger effort, part of the program management plan. Okay. And the plan establishes the criteria and activities for developing, monitoring, and controlling the schedule. Okay. So it talks about how you start creating a schedule, what goes into the schedule itself, and how you're going to be able to assess where you are in the schedule at any time and plan on what you need to do to either get back onto schedule or if there's slack in your schedule to be able to deal with that too. Okay, so we covered this. Schedule management plan is going to describe how activities will be defined and progressively elaborated. Okay, it identifies the schedule method and scheduling tool used. It documents the schedule format and establishes criteria for developing and controlling the schedule. You can tailor this for the use in any type of project, whether it is predictive, hybrid, or you may want some safeguards in there for adaptive projects too. And it also defines the maintenance process for updating the status and records project progress in the schedule module during execution. As I mentioned before, the hybrid approach schedule management plan can help by placing management controls on the project timeline. So with a hybrid or an adaptive methods are used, there aren't the rigid time frames where to monitor for the schedule. Okay. So we have a number of components of a schedule management plan. The project schedule module, where we document the methodology or tool used for schedule development. It includes maintenance planning, includes status updates, and progress during execution. Now, also need to document the accuracy of the schedule that we're working with so that you'll document how much of a deviation from your baseline will be tolerable. And also, if you have documented risks to the schedule, it's a place to document any of the contingency plans for those risks. Some basic things like units of measure. So how are you going to define the duration of each of your components? Is it going to be staff hours? Is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? Is it going to be story points? You know, whatever, but it needs to be documented. Any of the organizational procedural links, what we want to be able to do is trace any leaf of the work breakdown structure back upwards, and we want to be consistent with all of our estimates and our schedules for each of the components. There are some control thresholds that you need to document. If the schedule is deviating from the baseline, what you want to be able to do is document the what you're going to do if it deviates too much. Will there be escalation or reviews of the schedule that'll need to be held, and exactly when that would kick in. And your control thresholds are expressed as percentage deviations from the baseline, percent ahead, or percent behind schedule. Okay. So some of the rules that you'll document are performance measurement, for example, earned value management rules, if you're going to be using those. You'll document the frequency and formats of schedule-related reports, and should also include who they're going to. It should be part of your communications plan too. And then need to describe how schedule management processes are documented as part of the process descriptions. So what you want to do is check and see if there are any previous projects that were similar to or the same as the one that you're managing now. You want to be able to, what you want to do is compare the schedules that you develop with these previous schedules, because you should have pretty good historic data about what the baselines were, and then also about what has changed or what was changed in the previous projects. Okay. Before you get too far, it's good good to take a look at some of the historic schedules to see if you're in the ballpark as to what the durations are going to be. And you also need to check the lessons learned. All right. Talked about predictive schedules. These are, well, let's talk about some hybrid schedules. Okay. Some of the characteristics and benefits for a hybrid, tailored plans to combine consistency and management oversight with flexible scheduling of work. So what you want to do is establish those guardrails where you'll have the oversight documented, and what you want to be able to do is on a consistent basis demonstrate what you've completed. What you want to be able to do is increase the quality with your incremental or short-term value delivery. That's incorporating feedback into what you're doing, and changes, any of the improvements or fixes that you've incorporated at each of these intervals. So you can divide product delivery, can be divided into subsets according to a plan. So as I said before, you can either have milestones that you plan for, or you can develop on a cadence where, say, every 2 weeks you deliver value to your customers. Yeah, I know. 2 weeks sounds like a very short period of time. It is, and at the same time, it is plenty of time to deliver value. It takes a lot of practice. You can end up with a product that is that much better meets your client's needs. Okay. We've got some definitions we need to be aware of: work package, dependency, precedence relationship, and critical path. So a work package is the work defined at the lowest level of the work breakdown structure. So the very bottom leaf nodes of the WBS, for which cost and duration are estimated and managed. A dependency is a relationship between one or more tasks or activities. Dependency may be mandatory or discretionary, internal or external. And we'll talk about this in subsequent slides about the types of dependencies. There's start to start, start to finish, finish to start, and finish to finish. So keep that in the back of your mind, and we'll be talking about those in a little bit here. Now, precedence relationship is logical dependency used in the precedence diagramming methods, meaning you document which tasks have to be completed before subsequent tasks can start. And then critical path, you'll probably have some questions about this on the exam. And the critical path is the sequence of activities that represents the longest path through a project, which determines the shortest possible duration for the overall project. And any other paths that you have, parallel paths to the critical path, can have float in them, where they may be able to start later, finish later, okay? But the thing is that the critical path you have no float on the critical path. It's the one that determines the length of the project. So as a project manager, you're going to break down a work package into the required activities. And you may not do this on your own. Always enlist people with some expertise in this, just at the very least to give you a double check on it. And feel free to consult previous projects. And the project manager is going to determine the dependencies and the precedence relationships of the various tasks and activities that define the project. Also provide estimates of duration. Okay. And it's not going to be exact. Yeah, sometimes it's plus or minus 25%, usually less. Okay. Critical path needs to be determined because that's the path that you need to devote the most attention to. Then you'll take a look at resource allocations, and if there are any over allocations, you need to be able to smooth that out. It may require the project delivery date to be extended. Okay. Right. And if you've got any constraints such as having to finish by a certain date or before a certain date, you may need to compress the schedule, and we'll talk about methods of compression in a little bit here. So compressing really means shortening the schedule. Right. So the project manager is responsible for breaking down project activities. And if you'll notice on the right-hand side here, we go all the way from 1.0, which is the project name. Okay. You base your accounting off of the project, the 1.0 level. This goes all the way down to 1.1.2.1. So you can have work packages at different levels here. Notice that. Okay. When we talk about EV, we're talking about earned value. And I believe, have you covered earned value yet? If not, I believe we covered in another class here. Okay. Break it further into a planning package, and then the planning package is broken into one or more work packages. Now, the numbering system here is called the code of accounts. Okay, and each of these needs to be able to map upwards to the project itself. Okay. All right. So the activities are breaking down the project work packages into activities and entering the activities into the activity list using a verb statement. We've got some definitions over here. We'll talk about that. The activity list is a document that tabulates the schedule activities that shows the activity description, activity identifier, and a sufficiently detailed scope of work description so project team members understand what work is to be performed. Okay, this is all done up front. Right? Because with predictive methods, we feel that we know what needs to go into the project itself, what the durations are, and how we're going to account for it. So, we'll use this activity list to develop the project schedule, and there'll be several formats that we'll cover in a little bit here. The duration for each activity is included. So both the start and the end date for each of the activities. And we'll see how we can create a precedence diagram that will require the information from each of these. Okay, an activity dependency is a logical relationship between two project activities. So there are four buckets to define dependencies. It's mandatory, discretionary, external, and internal. Okay. So if you have a mandatory dependency, it can be required by the project itself, or they can be inherited based on how the work's defined, what the nature of the work is. So project manager needs to do, you've got to schedule it. There's no way around it. Okay. It could be something that's mandated by a law, could be an internal format that's required, things like that. There are also discretionary dependency types. Maybe as a result of best practices, or if you want things done in a particular order. Okay. Like producing user interface wireframes first before you fully develop the user interface. Okay. The discretionary dependencies, you can modify them as needed. They can be replaced with a better sequence, and if schedule compression is required, they may get replaced or eliminated. We'll talk about that in a little bit, about being able to do work that was planned to be in sequence, to do it in parallel. Now, there may be some dependencies that the project manager has no control over, or even maybe limited control. And that can be things such as an external vendor producing something, okay, rather than just being used as a body shop. Okay, it could be a subcontractor. Then there can also be internal constraints, internal dependencies, excuse me. The the organization that you work for may have formats that you need to follow, may have restrictions that you need to follow. Okay, this is the one thing, one of the ones where you do definitely have control over creating dealing with the internal dependencies. Okay, now we're going to get into the fun part of tonight. Know what a precedence diagramming method is. Okay, it's a technique used to create the network diagram. So this is going to be a mapping of all of the activities that are required to deliver the specified value to the customer. And that customer can be internal or external. So the precedence diagramming method constructs a schedule model in which activities are represented by nodes and are graphically linked by one or more logical relationships to show the sequence in which the activities must be performed. Okay, so it's a graphical representation of what needs to be done. Right. The activities that you're going to document, these are activities that have to occur, that you've said need to occur, and precedence diagram helps you to document when things need to be done and what the dependencies are among activities. You're going to see a lot of these things. The boxes are used where you have a start date, a finish date, actually 2 start dates, 2 finish dates. We'll talk about those. And then, if you've got a relationship here, it's assumed that this particular set of activities or this activity will need to follow the one on the left. Okay. Any questions? Right. Know the types of precedence relationships. We have finish to start, where activity A needs to finish. And this one here is obtain the occupancy permit from the Oasis Town Building Department. Before activity E, identify finished spaces for the tour can start. You can have tasks or activities starting in parallel, which is a start to start relationship. So in this case, this is confirm key stakeholder and customer attendance. And at the same time, we can erect the signage with customer branding. I have a finish to finish relationship where complete the landscape and decoration and identification of finished spaces for the tour can finish at the same time. Okay, and then start to finish. So activity D can start, identify the finished spaces for the tour. And activity F Then erecting the signage with customer branding can finish, would need to finish, okay, at that time, once you've identified the space, completed the landscaping and decoration. But know what these relationships are. You really don't see too many start to finish relationships. Most of your tools will force a finish to start type relationship. Okay. The other concept that we need to talk about is lags and leads. Okay, so a lead is the amount of time a successor activity can be advanced with respect to a predecessor activity. And a lag is the amount of time a successor activity will be delayed with respect to a predecessor activity. Um, Usually what you want to be able, what you want to do is limit it, the lead and lag times to approximately 2 weeks. And you want to document any of the activities and related assumptions. So lag and lead times, notice here, do not have a value. So don't include them in your duration estimates. We'll see that in the next few slides here. Okay. All right. Activity duration estimate is quantitative estimate assessment of the likely number of time periods required to complete an activity. So duration is only dealing with the time that it takes to complete an activity. Elapsed time is the actual calendar time required for an activity from start to finish, so that the activity duration could be something like 6 working days, and elapsed time would also include a weekend in there. Or if there are holidays in there, elapsed time will consider those things. And then the other thing we need to be aware of is the total amount of effort that's required for that activity. Okay, so that if you need 5 people working for the 6 days, the effort would be 30 staff days. Okay. A little bit more background. There are different estimating techniques that are used to develop schedules. They're analogous, parametric, 3-point, and bottom up. Okay, they each have their advantages and disadvantages. Okay. So analogous, you take a look at historic data from something that was done that's similar to what you're estimating for. And what you do is you estimate your duration or cost from the older projects. It's also called top-down estimating. This is done by the project manager and or subject matter experts. It's really a best guess as to how long things are going to take. And if you don't have a lot of details about the project, this can be a way to get somewhat of a handle on how long it's going to take to develop that project. Downside is it can be inaccurate, either by not matching the historic data closely enough, or if the historic information is faulty, you use that to make your estimates. That could throw you off too. Now, parametric uses an algorithm to calculate the duration or cost based on historic data and project parameters. Durations can be quantitatively determined by multiplying the quantity of work to be performed by the number of labor hours per unit of work. This is analogous to what we use in adaptive methods, where we use things such as measurements such as story points. And story points can represent a certain number of staff hours. The advantage is that parametric estimates can produce higher levels of accuracy, and that's going to be dependent on the data from the model that you're using. It's only as accurate as the data that you're using to model this. But you can easily increase or decrease parametric models based on revisions of the data. The downsides for this, and you may need to know these for the test, that parametric estimates don't account for a learning curve. Okay. So, meaning that the work is tougher for the team to produce up front, and as the team matures, can take actually less time to develop the equivalent value. Yeah, a good caveat that uniform units of work are not typical in projects. So if you're doing estimates, that make sure that your units of work match up. One thing that's used quite often is a 3-point estimate. Now this gives you a guess at duration using 3 estimates. Estimates saying how long is it going to take, most likely how long is it going to take. You'll have an optimistic estimate, which will be less than your most likely, and then a pessimistic estimate, which will be greater than your most likely. And we'll actually run some numbers on these in a little bit. If you don't have a lot of historic data, or if the project's completely new, then it's it's really a guess as to what it's going to be. You can also, with 3-point, include risk and uncertainty factors and get a better accuracy than single point estimates, which is really the most likely. Okay. To do this, we need more detailed resource information. And we need the knowledge of being able to estimate the various tasks. This is before we start development. Your most accurate one is going to be your bottom-up estimate. Okay. So you're going to estimate starting at the lowest level, at the leaves of your development tree, and the only drawback is that it can be very, very time consuming to get all the estimates for all of the leaves of the tree and roll them up. Okay. It's going to depend on a lot of people's schedules and the expertise of the project manager also. And to do the estimates, the bottom-up estimates, you definitely have to have the work breakdown structure well defined. It has to be fleshed out all the way down to the leaves. Okay? Because you're going to be rolling up those estimates all the way up. All right. There are two different methods of 3-point estimation. One is a triangular distribution or an average. The other is a beta distribution, or it's known also as the PERT average. For a triangular distribution, you just add up the optimistic, most likely, and pessimistic durations, and then divide by 3 since you have 3 components here. Show that as an equation for these estimates. So 3 weeks plus 5 weeks plus 10 weeks, and divide that by 3. You come up with 6 weeks. Okay. If you're using a PERT average, what you're going to use is optimistic plus 4 times most likely. Okay, so you're giving more weight to the most likely estimate, and then add in the pessimistic, divide by 6. Anybody want to volunteer why it's 6?
That's a sprint?
No, not quite,
Okay.
but take a look here. How many components do you have?
Are you saying because they've doubled it? Is that what you mean?
Well, you've got 4 times the most likely.
Whatever you would have had.
Okay, so that's 4. Pessimistic is 1 and optimistic is 1. So the division by 6 is because you've got basically 4 estimates here, or 6 estimates here. 4 for the most likely, 1 for pessimistic, and 1 for optimistic. Okay, so
Can you
in
give an
this
example of when you would use one over the other? Do you have one?
PERT is used a good deal because for pretty well-known efforts, it gives you it relies more on the most likely than it does on the optimistic or pessimistic. It's going to give you a slightly less estimate than the triangular distribution. But as you can see in this example, if the optimistic is 3 weeks, the most likely is 5 weeks. Pessimistic is 10 weeks. Okay. So it's going to be 3 plus 4 times 5, so 23 plus 10, 33. It's going to end up being 5.5 weeks. For your triangular distribution or your average, you're just going to add up the 3 plus 5 is 8, plus 10 is 18, divided by 3. So you come up with 6 weeks. There's a little bit of a difference over the entire length of a project. It may be, the difference may become more significant. Okay. This is relying on the most likely to be pretty accurate. And this will give you a wet-fingered guess as to an estimation for the overall project effort or for the activity effort. HERT will give you, will rely more on expertise as to what the most likely estimation is going to be. All right.
Is it always 4
follow-up?
times? Is it always
Say-
4 times?
Yeah, for PERT it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other
So-
questions?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm just trying to understand it. So who determines you're optimistic, most likely, and pessimistic? Is that just based on what you know and what people are telling you from your project?
Yeah, you take a look at your experts. You know, you can pull in experts on the project. People have gone through this before, especially once we have a history with it. All right. Other questions? All right. Now we're going to have some fun stuff. Know what the critical path method is. It's a technique of schedule analysis in which the schedule activities are evaluated to determine the float or slack for each activity and the overall schedule. To calculate the critical path, use the forward and backward paths along with float analysis to identify all network paths, including the critical path. I'm going to see this used with predictive efforts. Okay, what you do is, and we're going to see some more detail coming up in the next slide. You'll just create a diagram that shows what the dependencies are of all your activities and show which activities are dependent on completion of other activities. Okay. So here we have, it's a fairly simple one. We've got 2 parallel paths. Okay. We always have activity 1, which is 6 weeks. So if you only have a single task here, entry, and then your other tasks branch from that. And then if you have an activity that collects all of the other tasks, those two, okay, this task, activity 1 and activity 6 are always going to be on the critical path. Okay. We need to determine whether this path here with activities 2 and 4 or this path with activities 3 and 5 is our critical path. Now, they may end up with both. Okay, if these durations are the same as these durations here, I'm not on 1 for 1, but for the entire path. Okay, so where do we come up with that? Okay, activity 1 is a 6-week activity, right? So 6 weeks here. There's nothing that prohibits us from starting on this once the project's kicked off. Now, once activity 1 completes, we can start activity 2 and activity 3. Okay, each of these is going to have its own path. So for activity 2, we account for the 4 weeks, and activity 4 was 3 weeks. Okay. And then activity 6 is 1 week. That's where we get these numbers. Okay. 2, 4, and 6. Okay, so we add them up. 6 weeks plus 4 weeks, 10 weeks, plus 3 weeks, 13 weeks, plus 1 week is 14 weeks. Okay. So along this path, along the top, is 14-week path. We also take a look at the other path. So we still have the 6 weeks to start and the 6 weeks to finish. Activity 1 and activity 6 here. We add in the other 2 in the path. So activity 3 is 5 weeks, and activity 5 is 4 weeks. Okay, so it's 6 plus 15 plus 20 plus 7. And you end up with 16 weeks along the bottom path, and that's defined as the critical path. Can't, unless you, if that's getting out of hand, you need to have some controls on how to handle that. You'll probably see network diagram on the exam. I used to have a whole ton of questions on this back in the old days where we had chiseled the answers onto a stone tablet. Know this definition. This is the okay, we're going to come back to that. So with the network diagram dependencies, what we need to do is calculate the critical path. What we're going to do is a forward pass on everything. That means we're going to start at start and take all the paths possible, document those till we get to the end. Okay. We'll do a backwards pass. Once we've established what the start dates can be, we're going to go backwards and determine the latest finish for each of these tasks or activities. And we'll be able to calculate the float from that. Now, this key is a little bit messed up. Since these are PMI slides, I can't change it. Okay, duration is actually on top So task A is 3, task C is 2, and task F is 3. All right. D is 4, E is 4, B is 4. Okay. So duration really needs to be up above with early start and early finish. Okay. The activity name itself is going to be in the middle. You're also going to have late start, late finish, and float should be down here. Okay, and the key. And they don't document the float on here. Right. Now, what would be the critical path in this diagram?
Is it 1, 3? Oh gosh, I guess I should be doing letters. So A, D, and E.
Yeah, A, D, and E from start to end. The ones that have the colored arrows. And when you add it up, notice one thing. With every activity that's on the critical path, the early start and late start are the same. The early finish and late finish are the same. Okay? Because you can't start any earlier. Okay, you can't start any later than the early start date because it's on the critical path. And you can't finish any later than the early finish date, otherwise you're pushing the schedule out. Okay. Notice the tasks or the activities that are not on the critical path can have and will have different early start and early finish dates than their corresponding late uh, start and late finish dates. Okay, what we're saying here is that task C can start immediately after task A. Okay. Right? Well, we can delay that up to 3 units of time because it's not on the critical path. Now, if we do delay it, okay, it may, if it goes beyond the 2 days duration or finishes later than uh, the late finish date, it can become part of the critical path. Okay. But notice here, early start, late start. There's a unit of time difference between the two. Same thing for early finish, late finish. There's a day of slack in there, a day of float. Okay. So total float's going to be through the various non-critical paths to the end. It's how much can they absorb without being late? Okay. How long can they, how much later can they start? How much later can they finish? Okay. Um, okay. Forward pass, you establish the early start and early finish dates. You do that by adding the start date plus the duration -1 in this case. Reason you're doing that is that it starts on the morning of day 1. So 3 days later, you have all of day 1, all of day 2, and all of day 3. that you're accounting for in this task or this activity. When you branch off of that, you actually start with the next day. Okay, so if you finish at the end of day 3, you can start the next activity at the beginning of day 4. That's why they're labeled as 4s. Okay. Duration of 2 here means that you're going to use all of day 4, all of day 5. So your early finish is going to be day 5. You can't start the next task or activity until the next morning. So we have to hold this in abeyance. If we just had this, okay, this dependency, that early start would be day 6. But the thing is that we have this path that we have to account for too. Okay. Anytime you have multiple activities that are fed by a predecessor, you need to evaluate all of the legs that feed into that next activity. Okay, so if we take a look here, we can start activity D at the same time we started C. But activity D has a duration of 4. So we start day 4, we have day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. We finish on day 7. Okay. Here we finish on day 5. Well, the earliest the task F can start then is day 8 because the 7 here is greater than the 5 here. Okay. Make sense? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody lost? All right. So we have to do that again here. We have an now that yes, the earliest that this one can start is day 8. Okay. Latest it can start. Come back to that. We're going to do a backwards pass here. And this one, you see that the earliest finish would be at the end of day 4. But this one, the earliest finish is the end of day 7. So task E can only start the beginning of day 8. And end of day 11, it'll finish. Okay, your end is 11 units of time. Okay. Here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a backwards pass on this. Can we hold on for a second here? I need to take a call.
Sure.
Wasn't quick enough. Hmm. Okay, yeah. All right. So going backwards from here. Okay, day 11, we end up. The latest we can finish for either of these is day 11. So 11 minus 3 would be day 9 is the latest that we can start this task. Okay. We'll deal with that. Okay, going backwards from here, the duration of 4. So the early start and late start are both day 8, which means that this one has to finish on day 7. That's the latest it can finish in order for this one to not impact the overall schedule. Okay. So going backwards again, with duration of 4, this is day 3 is the latest that this, the earliest finish for this. I'm sorry, the late finish is the day before this one, so day 3, and we're not going back. We've got the durations on here. All right. So if we're at this point, day 8 is the latest finish that we have. So, I'm sorry, the latest start that we have is day 8. Notice because it's on the critical path, these two numbers are the same and these two numbers are the same. So task B has to finish by day 8. Well, okay, the earliest it's going to finish is day 4, but then it'll be task or activity E is going to be waiting on activity D to complete. Okay. So you've got some slack here, some float. Because this is day 8 for a start, this one can finish at the end of day 7. Okay. 7 minus 4 plus 1 is 4. Okay, so the latest it can start is day 4 because you have day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7. Okay, before it needs to finish. All right. Since this one is not on the critical path, the latest that task F can finish is day 11, the end of day 11. So subtract the duration from the latest it can finish and add 1, which is it can finish on day 9. Okay. So since this task or this activity and this activity are on critical path, again, the numbers are the same here. We go backwards from this. We figure out what the float is for the non-critical path. Okay. This the late start for activity F is day 9. Okay. Which means that activity C needs to finish by the end of day 8. 2-day task. So you have all of day 8 and all of day 7 to accomplish it. So the earliest you can, the latest you can start is day 7 on this. This is something that you need to know. Okay. Your mentors may have, and your study guides may have some additional exercises for you. Okay. Any other questions on this? You think you could do a network diagram? Just given the tasks, the
How many tasks
dependencies
are we talking about?
right here?
I think we could
We're
do one like
talking,
this for sure.
okay. Yeah, it'll be something like this. It's not going to be like 100 activities that you have to diagram or anything like that. You'll probably be given either a table of the activity names, the durations, and the dependencies, and be able to create a network diagram and then fill in all the blanks. Lean heavily on your mentors for this, because you do want to understand it completely as you can. Okay. All right. So your project schedule for your predictive and hybrid projects include start and finish activities. Okay, those are the little guys sitting out at the ends there that don't have any time associated with them. It uses specific dates in a certain sequence. So the sequencing is critical. And the schedule itself will set dates for project milestones, such as demonstrations, trade shows, things like that. Milestones in the example that they use here, this Oasis Town building, that things like obtaining permits, okay, things like that. You do have need to sequence, and they do need to have the dates associated with them. Okay. Your critical path needs to be established, and that's going to be the one that you need to worry about the most. But make sure that any of the other non-critical path activities are not taking longer than than the float that they have. Okay. And schedule is also going to track project progress based on the schedule performance, and it will provide visibility of project status to upper management and project stakeholders. All right. Different methods of presentation, different formats for presentation. And these are variable. They may change from project to project depending on the complexity of the project what your stakeholders want to see, how they want to communicate. So you can show a roadmap, you can use a Gantt chart, milestone chart, or a project schedule network diagram. Okay. So these are examples. This is what a Gantt chart looks like. It's going to have a list of the activities. It will show by bars the length of the activities and when things will be delivered. Milestone schedule is only going to be concerned with the milestones and the various deliverables that have been planned for the project. Okay. One thing you're going to need to remember for the test is that milestones have 0 duration. Okay, so deliverable A is going to be sometime the week of 4/4. Okay. But you don't consider, I mean, the milestone is just a marker there. It's not an activity or anything like that would add duration to the project. Now, the notations on here give you an idea of what the relationships are. Okay, so once you complete task A, you can immediately start tasks B and C because they have a start-to-start relationship. They can start at the same time. The relationship between tasks H and I is start-to-start relationship, but task I is delayed by 10 days. Okay. This is assuming the task H is going to take longer than 10 days. Okay. This one illustrates a finish to start relationship with a lag of 15 days. Okay. And then tasks L and I finish at the same time.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at item C. So
Yeah.
A doesn't point directly towards C. So does that mean that only H is a dependency for C, but C and B still start at the same time? Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, you can consider it that way. The
Okay.
other way to take a look at it is to draw another line from A to C. Same thing.
But C can't move to D until H is done, right?
Correct.
Okay.
You cannot start C until H is done.
Hmm. Then I guess B and C can't start at the same time if H isn't done, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's the same thing as A feeding directly to C. Okay. And since we don't have durations on these things, we don't have enough information to do a network diagram on this. Additional questions? Okay. I will warn you, we may go over a few minutes here because we've got about 13 more slides to cover. Okay. Two concepts you need to know about to optimize resources are resource smoothing and resource leveling. Okay, there's subtle differences between the two. With smoothing, you're going to adjust the activities, keep the resource limits the same, and you can do this for paths that have some free float, and the path includes some total float for the entire project. Okay. As long as you're maintaining that, okay, you're not going to change the critical path, and you're not going to affect the completion date. Okay. So smoothing can only take place on the critical path. Okay. And there are some restrictions where you're not going to be able to optimize all of the resources at some times. And notice that the resource smoothing is a resource optimization technique in which free and total float are used without affecting the critical path. Okay. Now, we also have resource leveling. So we adjust the start and finish dates based on resource constraints. So if we're building a building and building a couple of buildings, and the same crane is needed to be used for both of the buildings, and we may need to adjust the start and finish dates for the activities that use that crane. Okay, so that would be leveling it because it's a resource constraint. If one person is the only one who has certain expertise and is needed in two different paths, well, what are you going to do? You can't split that person in half. Okay? So you're going to have to adjust the schedule. You're going to have to level it out. Remember that the goal is to balance demand for resources with the available supply of the resources. You use this when shared or critically required resources, like we just talked about, have limited availability or are over allocated. Now, if you need that crane for one building, but you can't get it until 4 or 5 days after you want to start, well, not much you can do about it. You're going to have to extend your schedule. And leveling can also change the critical path. Okay. A couple of different techniques that can be used to compress schedules are fast tracking and crashing. By definition, fast tracking is a schedule compression technique in which activities or phases normally done in sequence are performed in parallel for at least a portion of their duration. Now, fast tracking, there's a lot of risk involved with that because you may start things in parallel, but any mistakes or delays in one of the paths can have an effect on the project delivery date. Okay. And then crashing is applying additional resources. That can be people, it can be contractors, it can be equipment. Okay. In one or more tasks or activities to complete the work more quickly. Crashing usually increases costs more than adding risks. In comparison, fast tracking increases risks. Crashing, historically we've usually counted on overtime, good bit of overtime to shorten schedules. And with crashing, you make sure that you address the critical path. It it's only going to be useful for activities on the critical path because other paths will have float. Otherwise, it'd be critical. Now, it can change the critical path also. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of what it's doing for each of the paths that have been established in that network diagram. Okay. Crashing, remember this, does not always produce a viable alternative and may result in increased cost and or risk. When you're using either one of these methods, you're really introducing a lot more risk into the project itself. As if you're doing software development, especially, there's a classic out there by Fred Brooks called The Mythical Man Month. It's a real short book, but Fred was the development manager for the original IBM 360 operating system. And what it boils down to is you can add people to a software project and it's probably going to be delayed, no matter what you add. Yeah. Because it's a creative process right now. Now that may be modified by the use of AI. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's a great book to read. Maybe online too. So what we do when we start the project, before we start the project, is we establish a baseline for predictive projects. Okay. So definition, schedule baseline is the approved version of a schedule model that can be changed using formal change control procedures only and is used as the basis for comparison to actual results. It's one of the main project documents that should be created before the project starts. Okay, know that definition. Okay. So your baseline happens, you can establish your baseline after you've completed the schedule planning activities. Okay. Project management plan gets this schedule baseline, something that you keep in the project management plan. Okay. And what you're going to be doing all throughout the project is comparing the actual progress to the baseline. You could be ahead of schedule, you could be behind schedule. Okay. Again, with a baseline, If you need to make changes to the baseline, you need to go through a formal change control process. You just can't go in there and, you know, take an eraser and a new pencil and change those dates. Yeah. Now, there are a couple of special intervals that PMI talks about for predictive efforts, things like blackout times, okay, so that there's no development done, that there are no changes that are done, I should say. The blackout times is um, used for testing and for making any corrections to defects before you ship it to the customers. Okay. Now, project manager is going to need to negotiate how and when the required scheduled downtime intervals are going to take place. You've got to coordinate that with your um, product management team, because they're the ones that need to let the customers know when the software can be delivered or when the product can be delivered. Now, for adaptive efforts, PMI has the concept of a hardening iteration or an iteration H. Okay. That you conduct this prior to the final release. And iteration H they define as a specialized increment, iteration, sprint. All the terms are synonymous. Dedicated to stabilizing the code base so that it is robust enough for release. No new functionality is added, and it's primarily used for refactoring and or technical debt, meaning that you're only making fixes to whatever product that you're delivering. Not doing any new development. And remember, with adaptive projects, you can have team members swarm on defects. You can have them swarm on anything that needs to be delivered in that particular sprint or iteration. So we're going to talk a little bit about schedule management in adaptive environments. Okay, so either hybrid or straight adaptive. It's going to depend on the team composition and the life cycle. If you're going to have a short project, it may be less of an effort than if you've got one that takes a while. The product owner and the rest of the development team work together to decide about the schedule. Okay. And then the project manager develops the roadmap to show release functionality and timeframes in conjunction with the product owner. Okay. Two approaches: time box scheduling with backlog, which really harkens to using sprints and Scrum. And then on-demand continuous scheduling is another way of expressing the term Kanban, where you just crack the flow of value through the development process. Okay. So the project team selects activities for delivery within an iteration or sprint, which is pulling things off the backlog and prioritizing those deliveries. And then teams produce increments of value for delivery and feedback. Okay. Ideally, every 2 weeks, you're able to deliver value to your customer. Okay, adaptive scheduling approaches. We talked about on-demand Kanban, lean-based. There are lean concepts that are used within Scrum also. So we're talking Scrum here, or time-boxed or iterative methods. Okay. With Kanban, you can use this to address individual requests. And what you're going to do with the Kanban is break things down into small chunks of work and prioritize those. And you can spread it out among team members to be able to work in parallel. Notice that Kanban does not work well in projects with complex dependency relationships. You want it to be straightforward. You want, you can have activities, tasks that build on a previous deliverable. And at the same time, if you've got a whole bunch of dependencies here and there, you've got to work to resolve those. And Kanban is not the way to go. Kanban is best when activities are equally divided among team members. So iterations or time-boxed scheduling. You use progressive elaboration, meaning that you start with a base. Okay, you deliver something that works, and then what you do is in subsequent iterations, you elaborate on those requirements, you elaborate on that functionality, and deliver more value at each of those sprints where you are addressing a particular feature. We're time boxed to usually 2 weeks. Believe it or not, 2 weeks gives you plenty of time to develop value and deliver it to your customer. You can also change anything on the schedule at any time during the project. Caveat, you don't want to change things in the middle of a sprint. Okay. But at the end of a sprint, you reevaluate, you reprioritize, determine what you're going to work on coming up. With Kanban, you're going to prioritize the requests or your features and stories. Then, see which one is required to start with, and then sequence stories individually through completion. One of the concepts of Kanban is limiting the work in process, meaning you don't just give everybody everything to start with. It's much more efficient to take a single activity, a single task from start to finish, and then pick up another one rather than working on 2 or 3 in parallel as we're used to doing. Okay. For iterative development, the requirements are going to be documented within user stories. The user stories are going to not include any data or potential implementation details. User story talks about what the deliverable has to do, not how to do it. The development team determines how to do it. Okay, the product owner then at the end of the iteration verifies that the acceptance criteria have been fulfilled. Okay. So for Kanban, team pulls work from a queue. That's a prioritized list of new activities, new tasks to be started. Okay. You pull that from that queue, pull from that backlog. Okay. With time boxed or iterative, you're going to have a backlog that you work with. Right? It's a prioritized backlog. You pull from the top or the bottom, however you know, whichever one has the highest priority for you. Okay. You keep adding stories to the backlog, keep reprioritizing the backlog. So if you don't finish something, or if all of the functionality has not been delivered in the sprint, you put the remaining stuff in the backlog and you prioritize it against everything else that is in that backlog. Kanban can provide incremental business value. And depends on how you manage it. It is not restricted to a particular time box. Okay, so your product owner needs to come up with stories that, when delivered, are going to provide functionality to your end customer. Now, with iterative development or iterative scheduling, business value is delivered early. The concept is called a minimum viable product. It's used to determine whether or not you do have a viable product in the marketplace. And then what you do is, if you do proceed with that product, you incrementally add to it. You add functionality to it, deliver that to your customer. Okay? Clear as mud, or are you okay with this?
Doing good.
Or you're, go ahead. With that?
Doing well.
Okay. All right. One concept that you have with time box scheduling is velocity. And velocity is a measure of how many story points a team can deliver in one sprint or one iteration. Okay. You can think of it as velocity being the capacity of the team to complete work. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to determine how much each story in the backlog is going to take as far as story points. Story points are a dimensionless measure, okay, an estimate. It'll vary from team to team. One team's capabilities are not the same as another team's capabilities. And story points can vary even within the same team, based on velocity can vary in a particular team based on the expertise of the team and what kind of work that they're pulling in. If they're pulling in something that they haven't done before, their velocity is going to be lower. If they're used to working on something, their velocity is going to be higher. Okay. And just remember the relationships here. A release schedule is going to be usually 3 to 6 months before you have a major release. And your iterations or sprints are going to last from 1 to 4 weeks. We like to keep them at 2 weeks. That's a good interval to be able to deliver functionality, and at the same time have a short feedback path on what worked, what didn't work. Yeah. We'll talk about story points in a minute here. Okay. So features are a higher level of abstraction. This is work that, when it's completed, is going to deliver some major functionality to the product. Okay. When we associate features with the product roadmap, it can offer visibility of when blocks of functionality can be released to the business and end users. It gives you an idea of what stories are involved in producing that feature and when that feature can be delivered. All right. Oh yeah. We should be able to finish up by about 20 after the hour. Okay. All right. Story mapping. You group the stories give them two dimensions. One is the sequence that they have to be developed in, and also the priority of the features. Okay. For the adaptive projects, you want to sequence the features and functions for a particular release. Okay, when you take a look down here, all right, iteration 1 is going to have these 4 stories in it. Okay, they're critical to be delivered in the first iteration. The second iteration is going to be concentrating on 2 other stories or the features. Okay, these indicate features. My mistake. Okay. Then when you're going to be delivering an MVP, it needs all of these features, and then these 4 features in addition to it. Now, these 4 features can be delayed until some subsequent release because they're not needed for the minimum viable product. That's what MVP stands for. Okay. Now, we're assuming that there's going to be a release backlog. Yeah, if you break everything down into user stories, what PMI has the concept of a release backlog, and those stories are then associated with features and functions that need to be delivered. So you can map them to this diagram. Okay. So we talked about story points before. A couple of different things that we can use is we can use relative sizing. So we also call it t-shirt sizing for the most part. And what you're doing is just determining whether an effort is extra small, medium, large, or extra large. Okay. Just like a t-shirt. Well, sometimes you go up to 2x, which, will accommodate some of us larger people. The other thing that you can do is use story points. Anybody tell me what a Fibonacci sequence is?
It's where you add the number right before it. So you would add 1 plus the number before it, which is 1, plus the number before it, which is 2, plus the number before it, which is 3, and 5. And
Yep. Yep. We use a modified Fibonacci sequence for story points because we start with 1. Okay. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. And then if you've got anything bigger than 8, you better start breaking it down. Well, because you got to get it done in 2 weeks. Planning poker uses the card deck. That's why they call it planning poker. But same type of things. You have Fibonacci numbers in a Fibonacci sequence, and you have your subject matter experts meeting, and they do the estimates and involving the team too. But you do the estimates based on how each of the people see it. Okay, so it's really it's more like the old card game War, where you determine what effort you assign to each of the uh, packages or stories, and the moderator counts, 3, 2, 1, and everyone turns over their cards. Now, if there's agreement, that's great. If there is no agreement, then the outliers are discussed. You're probably going to have an average that say 2 people or more are going to have. But if you have an outlier that's either shorter or longer, this with planning poker, you talk about why those estimates were given. Okay, and if necessary, well, you would be necessary to do it again once those discussions are complete. The concepts of definition of ready and definition of done. Know the definitions here. Definition of ready is the team's checklist for a user-centric requirement that has all the information the team needs to be able to begin working on it. So it's really just saying, well, what does it take for a story to be ready to be implemented? Okay. And then definition of done is a team's checklist of all the criteria required to be met so that a deliverable can be considered ready for customer use. Now this can include testing. It can, ideally, if you've got an adaptive effort, you're doing continuous integration, continuous deployment, meaning that once you hit the desired state, you check it in to a code management system and build and test right then and there. Okay. According to PMI, the definition of done is similar to acceptance criteria in predictive projects. Note that acceptance criteria is a concept also for adaptive efforts. Okay, you're going to have acceptance criteria for each of the stories. You're going to have acceptance criteria for each of the features. Okay, for every level. You have levels above that. Each level will have acceptance criteria saying this is what needs to be satisfied in order to be able to ship it to a customer and receive revenue from it. All right. Iteration backlog for adaptive and hybrid projects. Okay. At the start of each sprint, you're going to have a backlog of work that's been established by the product owner and prioritized by the product owner. At the end of each iteration, you'll take a look at what the priority is for that backlog work and perhaps adjust the priorities in there. Remember that the product owner is the owner of the backlog. One thing to note, you're going to have a sprint planning meeting before each iteration. Okay. So every 2 weeks, you're going to be reevaluating the backlog. So there's a lot of meetings that occur with adaptive efforts. Now, all right, hybrid scheduling models, an example. Project manager plans high-level project phases and milestones. Scrum Master runs sprints using agile processes. Right. Identify project work types and try to break them down. Okay, create a prioritized, work backlog which fulfills project phase or achieves milestones. Work in iterations or sprints of 2 to 4 weeks. Use shorter sprints for less experienced team to facilitate alignment. Experienced teams can also use 2-week sprints very easily. Okay. Plan work before every iteration using prioritized backlog items. Estimate every task to decide how many can fit in a single sprint. Hold a retrospective at the end of every sprint. Capture metrics to adjust timing and task estimates for next sprint. Okay. So, right. So take a look at that. And if you have questions, we can discuss them, or you can bring them up to your mentors. All right. Covered a lot today. All right. So we covered 2.6 of the ECO. And we learned how to, yep. Apologize for the 15 minutes over. And Monday, we're going to talk about resources. Okay. Any questions that we can address? Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks for, what's that?
Oh, thank you. Just thanking you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for attending
you.
tonight, and we'll get this straightened out about instructors too.
Sounds good. Have a
Thanks
good
for
night.
coming in.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you.
Welcome.